things that they think of as normal. Because of course, it's a tremendous mistake to think that that will be the same from one place to the next. So a couple of the things that I'll talk about in my India talk touch on that. And then of course, I'll be happy to answer any questions afterwards. So let me go ahead and share screen. Can I share my screen back?
Yes, I just changed it, so you should be able to.
Okay, thanks. Nope, we'll go back. So a brief intro to India, fairly simple intro. In terms of my background, I've been working on, in, and around Asia for about a little over 40 years now. I first went there with the Navy in 1981. So as you'd imagine, I've seen an awful lot in the way of changes since then. One of the places that hasn't changed as much is India, which is kind of interesting. And they have a number of aspects of their culture and their political culture that have inhibited change. And they have a handle on some of those, and things are changing quite a bit now. And some of them are still sort of deeply rooted. Another thing to mention very quickly about India is you've probably heard India's population has right about now overtaken China's. So India at about 1.4 billion is the most populous country on the planet. So here's their flag, and their flag is interesting. The current flag is the one on the left. The wheel in the middle is the Ashoka Chakra, which has a lot of symbolic and mystic meaning that's rooted in the society, especially the Hindu aspect of the society. The orange is actually saffron, which is a prominent and in many cases sacred color in both Hinduism and Buddhism, and both of those religions have very, very deep roots. In fact, their origins in India. So it's something to keep in mind when you look at the flag. The spinning wheel in the flag on the right, that is the pre-independence flag of the independence movement. And the spinning wheel symbolizes self-sufficiency. The idea that India, in consuming cloth, did not have to buy industrially manufactured cloth from the imperialists, from the British. They could make their own. And it was a symbol of India being able to take care of itself and stand on its own feet, by which they meant they didn't need colonial rule. India tends to think they don't get a lot of respect. They have a tremendous pharmaceuticals industry. They have a tremendous electronics engineering industry, both hardware and software. They also have a tremendous space program, and it's something that people really don't tend to think of when they think of India. So they've developed their own nuclear weapons, their own ballistic missiles. India and Pakistan developed their nuclear weapons programs at about the same time. India had kind of restrained theirs for a while, but when Pakistan tested a weapon, they tested one almost immediately afterwards in 1998. A lot of their nuclear weapons program was devised with Pakistan in mind. So they are two countries essentially cut from the same cloth who hate each other guts. India, whenever there's any kind of an attack or a terrorist incident, India tends to automatically think of Pakistan, and vice versa. There's really no love lost between the two countries. But I mentioned that just as a way of explaining why a country like India has a nuclear weapons program and a ballistic missile program in the first place. They also have a space exploration program. So this is the Mangalyaan 1 orbiter, which has been in Mars orbit since 2014. They were the first Asian nation to be able to get an orbiter into orbit around Mars. The second one crashed, but they have another one that will be launching in the next year. So they have a very active planetary exploration program. And again, the first Asian nation to do this, they actually jumped ahead of the Chinese in this respect, and they're very proud of that. At the same time, India is a place of great contrasts. So Zach, I have this video. Should I play the video or should I not?
I love this video, so
All right,
I mean, it's
all
just
right.
one may.
And you're going to get the video if I can find a way to play it. Just should be able to. Maybe I can. There we go. Here's the video. It has bad words, guys. Video was produced by UNICEF.
I'm not sure we're getting the video audio.
You're getting no video?
We're getting the video, but I'm not hearing the audio through Zoom.
Are you not getting these wonderful sounds?
A pile of shit staring at me.
Oh,
I close my eyes, I step away.
there we go. Now we're good.
No matter where I go, there's no getting away. Where is that gorilla? I step out on the street. What do I smell? Shit that's stinky to high hell. I hold my breath. I step away. But everywhere I go, there's no getting away. No shit, this is that shit. Oh shit, the fucking high. Lagay na pet ke niche. Happy birthday. Lagay na pet ke niche. Happy birthday. जहाँ मरेगा वही मिलेगा हर जगह सलाम मरेगा कुतुब मीनार गेट पे पिलिया चार मीनार जंतर मंतर खेत के अंदर एयरपोर्ट के बाहर अबे ओए यहाँ हद न मना है तो क्या हद न मना है ओ या हद न मना है तो क्या हद न मना है 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 ओ या Let's take the to the moon. 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 Let's take the 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 let's take the
Okay, I'll stop it there. That was entertaining, right? Okay, so they're not talking about dog poop, it's human poop, of course, because they have a problem in certain parts of India, and especially certain urban areas, with public defecation. And part of the reason is there aren't a lot of toilets. Sometimes whole villages will be without them. Sometimes whole suburbs will be without them. And that's why the chorus of this entertaining song is, where is that loo? Where is the toilet? And part of the symbolism here is that if everybody gets together and decides that's enough, India will deal with the problem. But of course, it's a huge infrastructure problem. We're talking about their priorities, not their abilities. So if we're talking about a country that can send an orbiter to Mars, there's certainly no lack of know-how when it comes to designing and installing the infrastructure needed to provide people with sanitary facilities. But it's a matter of priorities. Things like Mars orbiters, even nuclear weapons, can get a lot of public support because they're essentially badges of development. They're demonstrations of developed status, whereas something like sewage lines can be less of a priority. And water lines and sewage lines are terrible in India in a lot of places. Water from the tap is generally not potable in most parts of the country. Part of it is colonial era infrastructure. People used pipe that was either like Jonesburg pipe, which is a very strange 19th century invention, which involves many layers of paper stuck together with tar and resin. And that can become a nice hard pipe, but it breaks down over time. People also used clay, as they do in this country, to make pipe, both sewage and water. And of course, it's a lot of effort to dig the ditches necessary to install these lines. So why don't we just dig one ditch and put both the water line and the sewer line in? You know what I mean? You're getting the picture. And to go and redo that infrastructure is a huge job. And it's not the country's priority, but that's an interesting thing about it, is why isn't the priority? We're definitely not looking at abilities here. India is a tremendously complex society. So we have multiple ethnic identities, multiple languages, multiple political identities, multiple cultures, multiple castes, and religions, of course. Radical variation in positions of political parties, from religious nationalists to Maoist communists. And the Maoists are not in a formal party. There is the Communist Party of India is a Marxist party, and it calls itself the CPIM, Communist Party of India, Marxist. The Maoists are like most Maoists, they're just nuts. Maoists are nuts. They believe in people's war, and they will stir one up if they have to. That's another story. In terms of religious nationalists are in charge of India now. The BJP, the ruling party in India, is the Hindu Nationalist Party. So there's quite a range in political identities. We grow up in the United States and we think of the Republicans and the Democrats as being, vastly different parties across a broad spectrum. But when we do comparative politics, we see that in terms of the spectrum of politics, the Republicans and the Democrats in the United States are about this far apart. They're just not. And all of this stuff about the radical right and the radical left, this is created for political purposes. Then to look at them objectively from outside, there's not that much difference. But in India, there can be quite a range. Very complex entity. It's a federal republic, but it has a parliamentary system. Numerous states and federal territories. And again, the broad range of political parties, from the Hindu nationalists to communists. The Indian state of Kerala, down here at the bottom. I have a business in India, and we work way over here in Tamil Nadu state, way down south in Coimbatore. And Kerala is nearby. Kerala is a fascinating place. Very, very ancient societies of virtually every sort of religion. There's a Christian community that's been there since about the year AD 200. They came across the Arabian Sea and settled there. Kerala also boasts having the world's longest beach, which may or may not be true. I've not done a lot of beach measuring, but it is a fascinating and beautiful place, and it has a communist government. It's one of India's states. The state governments are elected locally, and in Kerala, they keep returning the Communist Party to power. It's an elected communist government. There's nothing particularly communist, wandering around Kerala that you would notice. I have to do business with the government from time to time. And to me, it seems like a lot of communist governments that will go into a big conference room with lots of people around a table, and I'll make a pitch for what I want to do. And everybody will yell at me and say, what are you doing for the farmers? What are you doing for the working people? You're just another foreign capitalist. And then that meeting will adjourn. And then the 2 or 3 people that actually make the decisions will sit down with me and we'll have some tea and then talk about what's really going to happen, which is kind of what a lot of communist governments are like. But you're learning about that, I'm sure. India has a complex history. To begin to go into it, incredible. Certainly, we could go back 7,000 years looking at the history of India. It first came into the Western view primarily with Alexander of Macedon, Alexander the Great, when he managed to get there, in a few centuries before the birth of Christ. He left some people there. I'm sorry I didn't bring the picture up, but there is a province in what is now Pakistan, which has lots of very fair-skinned, fair-haired people with light-colored eyes. And these people trace their roots right back to the garrison that was left there so many centuries ago by Alexander the Great. But more recently, India has been ruled by a succession of Hindu and Muslim dynasties. And India, as we know it today, was given its borders originally by the British East India Company. So India was conquered and administered for the first few centuries of British rule by the British East India Company, which was a private corporation. This was the heyday of mercantilism in the world and in Western imperialism. But the legacy of both Hindu and Muslim rule is in India today, as is the legacy of British rule. I was going to have a map here, I'm sorry. After independence, India was partitioned in 1947, where the Muslim population of the country was offered the chance to move into the western part of what was then British India, which is the valley of the Indus River. And that is now Pakistan, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Not all Muslims went. Muslims were not compelled to go into Pakistan, but a lot of them did because they were driven out by their Hindu neighbors. There is no great love lost between the Hindu and Muslim populations in India, dating back to this time when rule went back and forth between Hindu and Muslim rulers, some of which were quite brutal. And there are memories of that live on long after those people are gone. So a lot of Muslims were driven out, many stayed. India still has the second largest population of Muslims in the world after Indonesia. Contrary to popular belief, most of the world's Muslims do not live in the Middle East. They live farther east in Asia. So India will probably, in your lifetimes, will probably have the world's largest Muslim population within any one country. But the partition of Pakistan gave birth to a country right next door that has been very hostile to India pretty much that entire time. And again, there is no great love lost between them. The relations are always very tense. India had a socialist, some would say a social democracy period that lasted from independence in 1947 until 1991. When I say socialist, I don't mean Marxist, of course. These were more social democracy types. But it had a very interesting effect in terms of the country's industry. They adopted a lot of their industrialization model from the Soviets. They had close relations with the Soviets, although they did try to remain neutral in the Cold War. But it hampered their industrial development because the very, very strict socialist way of doing business and of organizing the government made it very unattractive for foreign companies to invest there. In fact, a residual hangover we have from that period is what's called the license Raj. The idea that to get any kind of permit from the Indian government, this could be as for something big like acquiring a piece of land for a factory, to something small like firing an employee. All of these things require permits that have to be granted by the government, and they're very hard to get because India is basically the birthplace of red tape. It's very difficult, and even today, even 30 years after they tried to move away from their socialist period, it's still very powerful. It's still very hard to do business there, and Indians are aware of it. They're aware that it's a problem. They feel that it's a big reason why their economic development hasn't kept pace with China, their neighbor next door. So it's something that's a hangover from the socialist period that still makes itself felt in many aspects of Indian life, especially their economic life. India is the world's largest democracy. I'm sure you've heard that. It's very cumbersome. This is a very big country with an awful lot of people. Elections can and do often take more than a month, sometimes quite a bit more. You can see from the graphic here, this is from The Economist. It talks about, it shows you the schedule for the different periods in which the elections are held in different parts of the country. So it takes quite a while to get the vote in, and then quite a while to tabulate it and get it out. So it's a very large democracy. It's a very cumbersome democracy, but it works. Basically, it's a parliamentary system, but they have single member district voting. So very strong regional identities, not purely party identity. Two houses in their legislature. It is kind of an asymmetric federalist system. You've probably learned by now that the United States is very strange as a political system, primarily in that instead of the center giving power to the regions like most countries do, instead of the center devolving power. In the United States case, the regions, in our case, the states, gave power to the center. And it's in the Constitution that any powers not specifically assigned to the federal government will be reserved by the states. Not that way in India or in most other countries. So there is an asymmetric kind of a federalism system that contrasts very much with our own. Then there's the idea of caste. Many, if not most, Indian marriages are still arranged, and this is relevant, I promise. Parents still play the main role in finding mates for their children. As I mentioned, I have a business in India. I have a lot of friends there. Virtually every couple I know in India is the product of an arranged marriage, and they're not unhappy about it. They've worked pretty well. The divorce rate is relatively low. And when I say every couple I know, I don't just mean people my age. I mean much younger people. Some of the folks who work for me, some of the younger folks I work with. They, in many cases, I think in most cases, they met their husbands or wives on their wedding day. That's changing a bit. You know, there are more meetings that take place before the actual marriage. But it's still something that's orchestrated primarily by the parents. There are tons of websites and magazines and all sorts of places where people can go and look for prospective mates for their children. There are astrological tables, which play a very important role. Practical things like, you know, job, education, the ability to make money, that sort of thing, the financial positions of the families, all of these things play a role, but they're still very often arranged. And a consequence of this is that Indian young people don't date as much as young people do in the West. You know, but at least in my time, many years ago, pretty much by the time we turned 16, it was, our parents would say that, okay, it was okay for us to start dating, if not before. That exists in India, but it's very small. It's not something that Indian young people get to do. There are love marriages where people find each other without the help of their parents. And when parents start talking to their kids about marriage, they'll usually ask, is there somebody on the scene already? And then they'll work with that and see if it's acceptable, that sort of thing. They'll get out the astrological tables and that sort of thing. But a lot of them are arranged. Now, this picture on the lower left is interesting in terms of social values and norms and how these could be changing in India. So this is a big lighted sign that I saw at Mumbai airport last year. It's for WhatsApp, of course. And one of the things that's really appealing about WhatsApp is that it's encrypted end to end. I use WhatsApp for business. India is constantly trying to make deals with Facebook, or now Meta, to get the keys to crack the code for security reasons. But a lot of young people find it to be a really great way to communicate without having that intercepted. And very often what they want to communicate about is relationships. So this picture is interesting because the lady on the left, she is wearing what I think is a wedding gown. So basically it's her wedding day. Who's the other girl? Is it her sister? Is it just one of her friends? Is it her girlfriend, which would be surreptitious if that were the case? So it's interesting to see how, you know, norms can be changing and such, and how technology can be playing a role in that. So that's kind of a diversion, but I wanted to talk about caste because that very much plays a role in choosing a mate. Caste in India, or caste, or whatever you want to say, is much, much more complex than this diagram. This is a vast simplification. In the last generation, it's become a really hot political issue in terms of these different castes. So the top three, you can see the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, and the Vaishyas. They are considered to be the twice-born caste. Now, the twice-born refers to a religious status. It's sort of analogous to your confirmation in the Christian West. It's a thread ceremony. Sorry. It's a ceremony that young people go through in which it's their second birth. Their first birth is the birth of their mother and father. It's their physical birth. The second birth is the spiritual birth. Okay, so why just the top three classes? The top three castes, rather. Because it's something that is not a privilege of the two lower castes. You can see that at the diagram that the bottom, the untouchables, who are often referred to as the Dalits, they're not part of the pyramid here. They're separate, and they're a caste that is so low that they're not even mentioned. They don't even formally exist from the point of view of the people farther up the pyramid here. So you can see the Brahmins at the top tend to be priests and kings. That's their heritage. The Kshatriyas are the warriors. The Vaishyas are the merchants and the landlords. The Shudras, when we get down to the bottom, these are the servants, the subordinates. And then the untouchables are below the caste system. They are the Dalits. They are the people with the worst jobs. The people who clean latrines, for example. And remember from the video, from the movie, not a lot of people have flush toilets, so they're cleaning different kinds of toilets. It says here they're sweepers, that sort of thing. They're basically the dirty jobs. So they're untouchable because they're filthy. That's the lore of caste. They've become increasingly powerful politically because they've started to band together and field candidates in elections. There are parties. There's a Dalit party, and there are also Dalit factions within other parties. So they've become more of a political issue. Also, for the bottom castes, the government has implemented various forms of what we would call affirmative action, things to give people from these castes more of a leg up in terms of training and university positions and that sort of thing. And it's a hot political issue because naturally the people up in the twice born castes don't really feel that they should be losing their places at university to untouchables and such. So it's a very, very hot political issue still. An interesting case are the Patels. So if you drive across the country and you stop at a Days Inn or something like that, and it's run by an Indian family, you'll probably see the name Patel on a certificate or something like that. They're a clan from Gujarat state, which is very conservative in the northwest part of India. Gujarat is dry, for example. There's no alcohol there. It's a very conservative place. That's their origin. They have come to own between 1/4 and 1/3 of all hotels in the United States. And I put at the top, it seems like a stereotype, if I'm saying that, all these, here's an Indian family, they must be innkeepers. It seems like a stereotype, but in the case of Patels, it's not. They're really that well represented, and it's a fascinating case, how that happened. But the question is, which caste do we put them in? That takes us to the question of caste versus class. What's the difference? Is it mainly about money? When we talk about class in the United States, we're mainly talking about wealth. People, there have been so many movies made for young viewers and such about, it's a timeless tale about, two lovers. One is from the higher class, one is from the lower class. What will they do? Their parents are against the match, all of that sort of thing. But very often it's about money. So if we look at Ms. Holmes here, she's won $188 million in a lottery in North Carolina. Does this change her social class? It's a different answer in the US than from various other places, even in the West. I did my graduate work in England. I was there for years. And so from their point of view, say that she was a clerk, it would not raise her social class. She'd simply be a rich clerk. In the United States, we might think, well, this gives her a whole different range of opportunities. It would probably put her in a higher class. Caste is about social stratification. And in India, money can play a role, but doesn't necessarily. People in the highest castes, like the Brahmins, are not necessarily rich, although people in the lower castes do tend to be poor. So it's not just about money. There is no official caste system in India. There are a lot of laws like that in India. For example, dowries have been illegal since 1961, but everybody still puts up dowries when they get married. A dowry is originally a way for a woman to go into her husband's family and not feel like she's going as a servant. She takes wealth with her. She takes something to contribute to the marriage. But it can be crippling for poorer families. And this is one of the reasons why the use of ultrasound to identify the sex of the fetus really got out of control in India in the 1980s, because people found out they could identify the sex of a baby that was on the way. And if it was a girl, they would abort her. As they would say, better to spend $500 now than $5,000 when she gets married. That kind of thing. So that was a real problem. And that's another thing that's illegal now, and it still happens. But there's no official caste system, but it's still very powerful in society. It shapes your life choices, the opportunities you'll have. It still affects your choice of a mate. Marrying outside of the caste is very risky, especially to the person who's trying to marry up. So it's still a big factor, and it's still something that shapes politics. It's reflected in politics there. So I've moved through this very quickly. I've left a few minutes for questions. Any questions? Resounding silence.
I have one. Is the caste system like still primarily tied up with like a religious sect, or does it like permeate outside of that and just affect the whole culture as a whole, and it doesn't really matter what religion you're in?
Hinduism is the framework. Hinduism is where a lot of the terminology, and there are other key terms like the Varna and things like that, which position people within their castes and such. But it goes beyond that. It's still, even for Muslim families, if people were trying to, if a couple from very different, castes were trying to marry, it would be a problem. But the framework is from Hinduism. And it's interesting because when people justify it, if I have a couple of, most of my friends are Kshatriyas, but some of them are Brahmins. And when I say, what justifies the privilege, they say, well, they earned the privilege in previous lives. So that eliminates, the revelatory religions like Islam or Christianity, and that's Hinduism. The idea that they're Brahmins now because they've earned that position in previous lives. So it has a religious framework, but it goes beyond that. Any questions about India from what you were discussing already with regards to India?
I did have one question. How strong is the Indian national identity? Some federal republics have a very strong national identity, while others don't. Where does India fall on that spectrum?
Or do you mean different identities within India itself?
That as well, but like also the like overall Indian national identity, that do people consider themselves to be from whatever region, or to be Indian from the entire country, if that makes sense?
Well, it's an interesting question with India. So India as a whole, like a lot of post-colonial societies, they have a very strong sense of their own identity and their own sovereignty. They don't want to feel that they're being interfered with from the outside. There's a lot of national pride in India. In terms of the regional identities, those are stronger than a lot of people want to admit. Hindi is the national language, and many people from the government that I know, and many people from Delhi, will tell me that everybody in the country speaks Hindi, and then they may speak their local language. I work way down at the other end of the country in the south in Tamil Nadu, and I meet lots of people who don't speak Hindi. I don't speak Hindi, but the guys who run my office do. And we have employees who are from that region or from Andhra Pradesh nearby who will speak only Tamil or only Telugu or some of the local languages. And they actually kind of resent the idea that they have to speak Hindi. I saw a real fight break out when one guy referred to it as the colonizer's language. So ironically, there are people I find a lot of people who speak their local language and English, but not Hindi. And this is partly because of local and regional identities, which are fairly strong. The people in Kerala that I mentioned before with the communist government, they're very proud of their heritage, which goes way back a couple thousand years at least. They see themselves very much as part of India, but they don't feel they have much in common with the people in the north, where the capital is. I don't see much in the way of conflict, although there is secession in the eastern part of the country, in places like Assam, the part of the country that on the map sticks out. It's got Bangladesh in the middle and it sticks out, bordering China, Nepal, that sort of area. They don't see themselves really as part of India. They have very long-running secessionist tendencies. People in Bengal, the same thing. Sounds like nothing else.
It's always, how long do you let the silence sit?
I know, I never know.
Well, we do have weekly discussion sections, so hopefully they have gotten some good ideas for questions that they can take and discuss on Friday with Will. But I would like to thank you, Dr. Seitz. Everyone hopefully will thank you for coming today and sharing your experience with India.
Okay, and
Thank you.
please, people feel free to email me if you have any questions or drop by. I am occasionally in the office these days. But in the meantime, thank you all for inviting me.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you all on Monday. All right. Thanks, Tom.
All right.
Cool.
Anything else?
No,
Sounds good.
I think we have a catch up. Do we have a catch up meeting scheduled Monday? I don't even
Think
know
so.
where we're at.
I think so.
I think that sounds good, but have a good discussion. Oops.